So I'm like, oh. So then I go run outside and I
Also, you guys could have responded this by now, but she did.
Great. All right, welcome this evening. We're going to start off tonight with a special recognition, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Funk.
So Eva Staffney, why don't you come on up and take a seat right here. So we have Eva Staffney tonight. She is one of 2 students in Stillwater who have been named semifinalists in the National Merit Scholarship Program. They're among just 16,000 students nationwide to receive this honor. Semifinalists must have an outstanding academic record throughout high school, be endorsed and recommended by a high school official, write an essay, and either earn an SAT or ACT score that confirms their earlier performance in the qualifying test. These 2 will go on to compete for 7,250 scholarships worth nearly $28 million next spring. So, Eva, thank you for showing up tonight. And thoughts on the program or scholarship or how you got this far? Or
Well, thank you for having me. And I would say I'm just really grateful to have the opportunity to participate. And I've worked pretty hard to get here, but I also realized that not a lot of people get here. So I'm just very grateful.
It's awesome, an awesome representation for your family and for the school district. So congratulations, and hopefully we'll hear your finalist here in a few months.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Super exciting. Congratulations. Just one question I had. I mean, do you have plans? Do you have plans already set that what you're doing next year? Or?
So I'm still applying to colleges, but I've been writing essays, touring different colleges, trying to figure out what I want to get into. I'll probably study business and engineering somewhere.
Okay.
I'm looking at Madison, Boulder, just a few places in the West Coast and the East Coast, just kind of everywhere.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
So tell us about this waffle truck.
Yeah.
That's that. Definitely. So me and my sister started a food truck this summer. We found a vintage Winnebago that needed a lot of love online. And my sister's always wanted to open her own business selling waffles or some sort of bakery item because she's the chef of the family. And so I thought I'd help her make that happen. We opened in September, and we've been doing pretty well so far.
Yeah,
Wow.
very well.
Awesome. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So where can I find this food truck?
So we're closing up for the season due to we don't want our pipes to freeze, and it's more of a summer venture because I have school and I need to focus on. But we don't have any public events. We have one more private event, and then we'll be closing up. But watch out for us next spring.
Okay, I will.
Do you have a 1-800 number or something?
Yeah, so
Book us.
you can
Yeah, yes.
email us at roxyswaffles@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram, I guess, and send us a DM, or we have a submission form if you want to book an event with us.
Right. Just final question for me. Do you have any maybe special memory that sticks out of your time at Stillwater now that it's kind of coming to an end? Anything that you would share or advice or?
I don't know. I guess just I came into Stillwater in 3rd grade. I kind of didn't know anything, but I would just have to say I've never had a bad teacher. I mean, all my teachers have been absolutely amazing, and they've helped me grow so much, and I guess thank you to them because wouldn't be here without them. But yeah, just everyone's really friendly. I mean, Illy always says hi to me in the hallways, and I can play sports with everybody, and it's just a great community.
That's awesome.
I have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where did you guys move from?
We moved from Woodbury, so not super far away, but just
So,
one
are
neighborhood.
your parents
over.
here today?
Yeah, so my mom's back there and my stepdad
Thanks
too.
for moving to the district. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're very proud of you.
Very
Very,
proud.
very proud. You've made us very proud, so good job.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming in.
Let's get a picture taken.
Yeah.
So, you guys want to take a picture?
You want me to?
You got a picture? There's a picture. Camera.
You bet. All right.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Kristen, can you send that to one of us, please? Thanks.
Great, okay. This evening, we do not have any public comment, so we will call this meeting to order. Joan, can you do the roll call, please?
Director Hockert?
Here.
Director Kelsenberg?
Here.
Director Petrie?
Here.
Director Porbeni?
Here.
Director Riley?
Here.
Director Fatava?
Here.
Chair Sherman?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll move on to approval of tonight's agenda, and I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda this evening. Is there a second? Director Petrie, thank you. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. Now we will move on to, okay, I'm still looking at this, Pledge of Allegiance. The student report. Which one's going first?
I'll go first. I have our student academic report. So students have settled into the year both academically and socially. Many are feeling stressed due to academic workload, but we're eager to get office hours back into our schedule, hopefully. The sophomores are excited for the movie night and football game this upcoming weekend. In most of their classes, they are ending units and will be taking tests this week. The juniors are most heavily feeling the stress of balancing workload at school. They seem to be enjoying the year with their friends and attend many social events together. The seniors are a little stressed with balancing more school and social life. Everyone's trying to get their most out of our senior year by attending as many events as they can, especially the sports games. Our student body is looking forward to the girls' soccer game next week at the bank, and we are estimating that most of our students will be able to go to the game.
Okay, and then for our extracurriculars, we have the girls' soccer team advance to the state semifinals with a win 1-0 over Lakeville South. They will play at Rosemont on Wednesday at the U.S. Bank Stadium at 10 a.m. And congrats to both of our boys and girls cross-country teams for advancing to the next Saturday's state meet. The boys finished first in their section and the girls second. The girls' swimming and diving team has clinched the conference and will compete in their last dual meet tonight at Forest Lake. Last Saturday, the team finished third at the state true team meet. The volleyball team advanced to the Section 4 semifinals with a 3-0 win over St. Paul Central. The football team completed their regular season with a district championship, and they will host Brainerd tomorrow night to open section play. The adapted soccer team completed their regular season schedule with a win over North Tartan, and they will begin playoffs next week. The dance team opened its season this week to start winter sports. Sunday is movie night for SHS students in Pony Stadium, and this event is sponsored by Student Council.
Great. Seems like another incredible season for our sports teams. Yeah,
It's off to a good start. Well, this school year so far.
great. Any questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on to our superintendent report. Thank you, ladies.
First thing tonight I'd like to give is an enrollment update. We are up about 65 students over this time last year. So our enrollment pre-K 12 plus is 8279, and that was as of last week. The enrollment a year before that, last year, was 8214. So we are starting to move in the proper direction with enrollment as we continue to, move away from the after effects of the pandemic. Chromebooks, good news. They have been started to be distributed, and the distribution should be complete in the next 2 weeks. And I want to just thank the community for the tech levy and allowing us to get all these Chromebooks into our students' hands. So that's a real positive for the district. As I have spoken repeatedly over the past few months, I'm still trying to get out and meet various people. So starting last week, I started to meet with different staff of different buildings throughout the district, and that will be continuing until January. And then after January, I will start meeting with smaller groups of teachers and professional learning communities throughout the year. And at some point in the near future, I'll just be coming and providing an update on people's thoughts and perceptions of the district from conversations they've had with me. So, and then I plan on meeting with Cornelius's group with the student council, the student leadership.
Student leadership team?
On November 11th, I'll be meeting with them as well to start my meeting with some of the students.
Great.
Last thing I want to mention, pending your approval here coming up, is that we have hired Marie Schroll to be our Executive Director of Finance. It's really a positive thing for the school district, I believe. She has worked in school finance since 1999, and most recently, she has been the CFO of the St. Paul School District since 2014. So it'll be great to have somebody with a vast background in school finance. I think that will really help us moving forward as we make plans and decisions for the future. So that's good news. Thank you.
Great. Any questions for the superintendent? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to my report, and I don't have anything this evening, so we'll go on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is up on the screen for everyone to take a look at. Is there a motion tonight to approve tonight's consent agenda?
I'll move.
Great. We have a first. Is there a second to approve the consent agenda? Director Kelsenberg, seconds. Any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of approving tonight's consent agenda, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. We have one action item this evening, and this will bring up Dr. Cherry for our final reading and approval of Policy 905, advertising.
Good evening, Chair Sherman, Board Directors, and Superintendent Funk. We have one policy we're ready to bring forward for action. This is the third reading of our advertising policy. We've reviewed this a few times. We have not made any changes since the last time I was in front of you. And so at this time, we're asking for approval to adopt Policy 905, our advertising policy.
Great.
I'd like to move a motion to.
Great. We have a motion to approve Policy 905. Is there a second?
A second.
Great. Director Petrie seconds. Any questions or comments before we vote? Okay. All those in favor of approving Policy 905, advertising, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. All right, now we're going to move on to our reports this evening. And we're going to start with the 2023-2024 academic calendar. So I'm sure our student reps are interested in this.
Good evening, Chair Sherman, Superintendent Funk, and members of the board. Tonight, I'm going to share the recommendation from the Calendar Committee for the 2023-24 school calendar, so next school year. Tonight will be a report, and we'll be looking for action at a future board meeting. So the Calendar Committee consisted of parents, teachers, paraprofessionals, district administrators, building principals, and looked at many different things and considerations that we had to take into account as we started to build this calendar. As we built it, we looked at to balance the number of days in each quarter and semester so it's balanced throughout the school year. We take into consideration our athletic, academic, assessment, and activity needs of our students. Looked at our assessment calendar, kind of when MCAs and AP testing at the high school and NWA at the middle school and FastBridge at the elementary and all the different assessments that we make to make sure there's adequate time and preparation for all those assessments. Look at our contractual agreements. with the number of teacher days that we need, number of student days, PD days, holidays, those sorts of things. Look at graduation and when the end of the school year and make sure that aligns. Look at our Minnesota State High School League calendar and also the calendars of our neighboring districts. Also align spring break with the end of third quarter. So we want to make sure that we don't have spring break and then the very next week, the third quarter ends a couple days later, to make sure that there's space in between spring break and end of third quarter comes. And then balancing our staggered start for both secondary and elementary. So as we look at the calendar for this year, for next year, we would look at starting very similar to what we've had the previous years. So the 6th and 9th grade with a staggered start would be on Monday, August 28th. And then the next day, Tuesday, August 29th, would be the rest of our secondary students. And then after Labor Day, on September 5th, would be our elementary school start. And then that first week, that week of August 28th, would be our Ready, Set, Go conferences, similar to done for the last few years with our elementary students and families, what happened that week of August 28th. And then you can kind of look at the calendar. I know it's up on the screen. And then we'd be looking to end the year on May 30th. May 31st would be the grading day, and then graduation would be at that Saturday on June 1st. So with that, I will open up to any questions or comments that any of you have.
Director Riley.
I'm just curious, it's usually we get a couple of options, and I'm just curious why there was only one option or
Yep.
one recommendation brought forward.
We looked at a few different options. We actually kind of voted on two as a calendar committee of kind of which one we wanted, and the calendar committee kind of unanimously wanted this one forward. So we decided to bring this one that was kind of the unanimous choice from the committee moving forward for recommendation.
And Director Riley, I'll give kind of my guidance that I've provided everybody up till this point in time is I don't want to see any significant changes coming in as the new superintendent. And so if the calendar was one this way this year, my guidance to Mark and the committee was, all right, we should be similar to what we're doing now. I want to try and get a feel for the district and why we do what we do. I will be forthright with you. We start earlier than this. In my previous district, we did, but there was rationale for it that we ended first semester by the holiday break. I'm not real sure why we choose to start when we do here, but again, that's why I have just said, all right, we're going to maintain status quo till we get a better chance to look at this, and so that was my guidance.
Sure, I appreciate that, thank you. I know every year I have the same question. There's maybe one other that does with the various boards about the starting prior to Labor Day, and the statute is kind of taken out of context here because the projects are done in totality in this district to garner that amount versus major construction in any building that would not allow you to be, operational or to have that early start. So for me, I would just like to follow, what our legislators have put forward in the laws that we have in that regard. I understand the love of and the like of starting early with the younger schools, with the Ready, Set, Go. It sounds like it's getting off good and great. When we start prior to Labor Day, what usually happens in that first week? Because I know there's going to be conflict with families that, struggle with end of the summer occurrences and trips and gatherings and so on and so forth. Is that mostly a review or recovery or what is going on if a child isn't there? Are they going to miss out? Are they going to get off on the wrong foot?
I think attendance, I can speak, from the elementary perspective, there's a Ready, Set, Go conference, and I know being a building principal for many years at the elementary level, we had really good attendance. So in terms of people missing out, that was not an issue in the buildings that I happened to be at. There was really good attendance for the Ready, Set, Go, and we were able to follow up with families that couldn't be there for whatever reason to get those scheduled, so that wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
Looking at it from the secondary level and just from anecdotally, as I don't know that there's a lot of students that aren't there the first week that need to get caught up, I believe.
We can get that data. We can get to the hard data on what attendance looks
I
like.
think our district is kind of split evenly on parents that want it either way. We've done surveys in the past, and it's kind of an even split. So, and like I said, I understand getting the kids moving and motivated. But again, I refer back to the statute and what.
I went back and I was looking at the past surveys we did, because at first, I think this time last year, we were thinking we should do another calendar survey. I know there's like survey fatigue though, and as I was talking to our new superintendent, he kind of said, I think that we should be doing the strategic plan first, which is, I think makes sense. I mean, we should be looking at what comes from that and then including survey questions as appropriate around the calendar, or using the results of that to drive the calendar. But it was in 2018, it seemed like it was, and 2019, it was split. I went back and looked at the survey results. It seemed like it was swaying more towards not having a preference and being okay with the Labor Day, the post-Labor Day start. A tremendous amount of staff, like 70% or higher, I believe, of staff felt that it should start early. But the one thing I noticed that I would like to include would be our students' voice in the academic calendar, and when they feel like they want to start. And I think at the time it was like they're ready to start early, but they're ready to be done after Memorial Day. It was kind of, that start. So I don't know if you as students have any opinion on calendar, on starting of school, or?
I think starting like the last week of August is completely fine. I like that. And I kind of like that you kind of ease into school by having a shorter week the first day, and then you kind of build up from it. And also it makes it so you can end school a little bit early, which is always nice.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. I don't know.
I agree. Like, I think more of my summer is in June than it is August. So, I mean, in August, like, start of the month, you're already thinking, like, I'm going back to school.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice to just get it started where, like, especially us, we're a spring sport, like, our tournaments usually go halfway through June. It's kind of nice to get out, have the break, and really, like, actually start summer early.
Yeah.
So I'd have to say, like, I preferred going back earlier.
Yeah. I just think that perhaps maybe getting the students' input on that calendar too would be an important voice in the mix as well, so, great. Yeah, go
Can I
ahead,
throw out a
another
question? So going back to what Dr. Funk was saying, that we're pretty much trying to keep the calendar the same as last year. So I pulled up, or this year. So I pulled up our current calendar, and I'm just kind of doing a quick once-over. I love that next year looks like we're ending a little bit earlier in May, which is excellent. But one other date that I'm noticing is this year we have the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off. But I'm not seeing that over there. Is there a rationale for that decision, or
So
what are your thoughts?
I can speak to that. When Mark came back and showed this to me, and he explained that to me, because I know people appreciate that off. So if you look at the calendar, you'll see November 7th is an election day. Well, right now, there's no election on November 7th. The only way there'd be an election if a special election were called, because next year's not a general election year. So an option that you have as a board would be to take that November 7th date and shift it to the 22nd. So that's something for you to consider, and get me feedback on what your thoughts on that before we come back in a few weeks for approval. So that is just something to think about.
Yeah, and I know just anecdotally, when I was out in the community and just in my neighborhood, people love, because this was the first year, just so you know, it was the first time that I ever remember that we had the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off, and families were really liking that. So, but I also know that we took the election day off for safety concerns in our schools, so the fact that it's not really an election period of time, maybe, in the spirit of just maintaining the status quo till we evaluate the calendar, would be good. Any other questions? Great. And so I guess I would invite the community to reach out, contact the board, contact superintendent. It sounds like the two options would be just really that Thursday or that Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So students too, weigh in. Great. All right, our next report this evening is kind of part two. We had a student achievement, kind of a debrief, and now we're going to come back and have at it again. So welcome, Caleb.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Chair Sherman, Board Directors, Superintendent Funk. As you mentioned, this is kind of part two of our student achievement update from back in, was it September, I think, end of September? So today we're taking a look at strategy and structures that we've got in the district that utilize data for improvement efforts. And so we're really going to be taking a look at some of the areas that are receiving new or renewed focus as we come off of the pandemic, as we have a more full and robust teaching and learning department to support this kind of work. So as we mentioned, there are kind of three areas that we were looking at in response to the data, areas that need continued attention through staffing efforts, through funding efforts, and through just strategic action around leadership in the district. So that being curriculum, staffing, which I won't get into as much, and then professional development. And there's a few other pieces that we'll take a look at as we go on. But as I mentioned, moving forward with data, the key areas that we use data to make informed decisions that impact students across the district. So our curriculum and instructional review process, I'll talk about that. We'll talk about our professional development model, a couple new frameworks within it. We'll take a look at our multi-tier system of supports, and we'll talk about some of the specific strategies that we're employing there. So the first thing to highlight is, again, a review a little bit of our meeting last time. A similar slide, how we use data. We use it to evaluate our instructional programs. We use it to set goals for the district, to monitor really how our progress is going towards reaching those goals. Individual schools use it for their own school improvement planning, tracking development towards initiatives. We use it for teacher evaluation, professional growth. We use it for a wide range of purposes. And like I said, data, my goal in this presentation is to talk about how the data informs a lot of the systems level work. So the first area is curriculum and instructional review. This is a 5-phase or 10-year process that we use to formally review our educational and instructional programs. Anything from a specific program like our EL program perhaps, or content areas aligned with the Minnesota standards. So our 10-year process follows the 10-year review and revision of Minnesota standards. Every 10 years, each subject area gets revised. So it's linked to that, and it is also linked often to new materials adoptions. Not always the result, but often when you see a big new literacy, or in next year's case, science implementation, it follows a formal review process to make sure that we're having the conversations and identifying the data, doing the deep dive into our standards to make sure that we're identifying how a massive new purchase is going to impact the district. So this 5-phase process goes through study and evaluation, into planning and review, into development, and the goal is full implementation with fidelity. And so we recognize there's processes within each pieces of these, and we also recognize that there's a need for ongoing or continuous improvement and refinement. So even into years 7 through 10, where the materials, we might start to see some gaps in our instruction. We may see some areas that we need to tweak or add in a few pieces. That can happen in phase 5. It can really happen anywhere as we're looking at the needs that are emerging within the data. That's also very much integrated into our professional learning communities and professional development, which I'll get into as well. So this is a quick look at what that process looks like. So we've got, built out to 2031, 32. So Not that this is exactly how it's going to roll out, right? This is impacted by budget cuts often. This is impacted by changes in standards. For instance, math, I think, was last revised in 2006. And so the standards we have for math are extend beyond that 10-year cycle, which puts districts in a bind to say, how do we adjust? When do we bring in a new material, new resources for staff and students when you've got standards that are that old? So this is an example of elementary. The other thing to highlight within this is, the state revises the 4 core areas in 4 years consecutively, which is maybe great for them. It's hard for us to implement a brand new set of standards, maybe new materials, especially at elementary every year. So we do want to try to stagger some of that to reduce that implementation overload that teachers sometimes feel.
I just want to point out that this is really best practice, all right? Caleb has developed this with his team, and we're already having conversations. He's talking to science vendors. The team is in preparation for the adoption next year. So I don't think we've had a lot of this historically, going way back 20 years. So I want to just thank Caleb and his team for putting this plan together. Now, part of that will be, of course, how we are going to maintain it and fund it. And really, this go back to when we're talking strategic planning. All right, what our priorities as we move forward. But great work on getting us this far.
Yeah. And I think that's important to be able to see the long-range planning that has to come into play, especially as we think from a budgeting perspective. And we realize that our current science materials, FOSS, we've had for a long time. Our current math program is very older. And so we've got new pieces that need to be brought into our system to address the new standards. We're building this model with our new team, and part of it would be understanding all the different tasks that occur. This is way too small to read too many words on a page to even go through, so it's there. You can take a look at it. But within each of those 5 phases, there's a number of tasks that we need to achieve, whether that is, the curriculum coordinators working independently, pulling together the conversations that they've been participating with staff, or these are documents that staff put together. There's a number of tasks needed to move the curricular areas through this process, and documentation that we're able to highlight and hyperlink to really guide that work, templates that we create, as well as the actual documents that form the curriculum. Curriculum sometimes is thought of as just the textbook. In my perspective, this is the curriculum. It's that interplay of the materials with the instruction, with the assessments. So really to be able to step back and look at curriculum and instructional review from all of the facets is what needs to happen. It is a lot. It's a lot of work, and as I said, with our new team, we're building out what those processes and products need to be as we work with our instructional teams. As I said, it's not about the materials. It is about that integrated process. So it's the question that teachers should ask is not when am I going to get new materials, but rather where are we in this process and what's our next steps. So that those next steps, like I said, are led by our curriculum coordinators specifically in this work. And so pleased to, I've sent a few emails regarding who they are, but I'm glad to mention that Amy Fisher is in her 2nd year with us. And so she's really focused at elementary science and math, including interventions in our MTSS process. Sky Hookstra, new to us this year, focused at elementary literacy, as well as our reading interventions and our MTSS process as well. Amber Bentley, who's focused primarily at secondary level with STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, as well as the career and tech areas, as well as a variety of other areas within secondary and elementary, including Ed and health and facts.
Has she been with the district, just to-
Um,
in this role? I
Yeah,
guess?
this is her first year in this role. She was a instructional coach at Stillwater Middle School for a number of years as well. And then Rebecca Beal also comes to us this year as her first year. She had experience in St. Paul with social studies in that department for instructional review work and curriculum teaching and learning. So she's working with social studies, K-12, arts. She's our humanities lead at the secondary level. So a lot of the work that we saw in the previous slides, that is the function of these 4 individuals, working with the coaches and coordinators and other teacher leads within the buildings and across the district, as well as with principals, instructional coaches, our PLC, PD leads, but then also our teaching staff, right? This work has to be built on the conversations of our teachers. And so in each of those areas, we want to have teams of teacher leaders, committees, engage in this high-level thinking, receiving professional development, but also then carrying those messages back to the buildings, getting that feedback and bringing it back together so that we have a team looking at this, a team of teachers.
Can I ask a quick question?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Maya.
A quick question for me is there a way in this phase, the curriculum and instruction review, that you can kind of bring the board along? Because it's a lot of information over a long period of time. When you bring the proposal to the board, for the board to understand really what is being presented to them. The last time we did this, obviously, it was the English language or the reading curriculum, which got a lot of pushback from people outside into the community. And then it created kind of a little bit of a mess, with the implementation. So I'm wondering if there's a way that you can kind of educate or inform the board along the way.
Yep. So I would say a couple things on that. So we do have the World's Best Workforce is our district advisory committee that we present to and share and receive feedback. And I know last spring, I know I came before this group and shared a quick update regarding where we're at with science elementary implementation, as well as some of the 6th grade, the middle school conversations that we had. So certainly there's room to have some updates similar to this, maybe a little shorter.
Right. Maybe
than
just
the
in
data.
kind of what the study sessions are for, maybe just a quick
Right.
update on where things are at.
The other thing that I've seen, and again, this goes to how you structure your committees. I mean, we've got World's Best Workforce, but I have seen curriculum advisory committees
Yep.
that are made up of community members.
Yep.
There's usually 2 or 3 board members on there.
Yep,
And that way, the board
is aware.
is aware.
Yep.
And there's a representative or two, a few representatives from the board aware on those
And
committees.
that's not unusual to this district, but it's unusual for now. So those other committees that you're speaking of, those are very general, and it really doesn't give the board an understanding of what you're bringing forward as far as curriculum goes, because it's such a it's just very vague. There's not a lot of information in there about the particular curriculum. And that, again, I go back to that, the English curriculum that we did, or the language reading curriculum, and it turns out that the community was right in their hesitancy. So that, I like that. We've done that before in this district, but we're not doing that right now.
So again, that's something, as the board start looking at committees coming up here
Yeah.
at the start of the year, that's something that you could certainly take a look at. And then, I know you still have your World's Best Workforce.
Right, which is in statute, that is the committee that is the district advisory for curriculum. And so we can take a look at that. We have a parent and a teacher from every building represented on that. I know we've had board members on that in the past as well, so. And then in terms of the presentation, we can continue talking about what is included and how much. And how many study sessions.
Well, and I think what I'm struck by so far in your presentation is your most senior person here is year 2, starting year 2. So when we say that we haven't, I mean, I haven't really ever seen a nice calendar like this, which is so nice, and I appreciate the planning and the thoroughness, but we've taken a beating on some staffing at the central offices. And so just to see names with these important positions is a great relief to me, and should be for our families and our teachers. So I'm grateful. I wanted to share this with you because I shared it at the last meeting, but you weren't here. I went into Lake Elmo to just a PTA meeting, and the staff that was there and the principal that was there was just raving about how much work they're doing with your team this year, and that it's been something they've never had an opportunity or dived this deeply like they have this year. So that's a kudos to everyone kind of on your team, but I definitely heard that feedback. So thank you.
So that was curriculum and instructional review. Very, very much related and interconnected with that is professional development, right? That is the how we actually then go about increasing our teacher effectiveness within that curriculum. And so there's kind of 3 areas I want to look at with regard to professional development. And the first is this professional learning community. We've been doing PLCs for a long time in the district. Most districts have been doing, and I use that language intentionally, and that's the way that Solution Tree often will engage with districts. We've been doing PLCs, but how deeply are those processes integrated into our various team conversations? How often do we dig into the data to make those data-informed decisions about how to change instruction for individual kids and groups? So as we recognize that we've been doing PLCs for a number of years, there's also an opportunity to refresh, to take a step back and to make some intentional changes within our processes around professional learning communities. So I like to keep coming back to what is the core. At the core of professional learning communities and our collaborative action team specifically, there's 4 questions. What do we want students to know and be able to do? How will we know when they've learned it? How will we intervene when students experience struggle? And how will we enrich and extend when they're ready? At the heart of this work, those are the 4 questions that need to drive us. There's data throughout that conversation. You can't function as an effective PLC without that data to say, how are kids learning? What do we need to do differently? And so this has received some additional focus this year, partly because of the QComp funding. So we've identified PD and PLC leads, so an additional teacher leadership position that is functioning to help grow and refine our PLCs at the school level. And we also will be having a teacher leader in a paid leadership position within each one of our collaborative action teams. So that's, about 120, 150 teams that we have that will have responsibility and oversight within the functioning of those collaborative action teams. So that's something that as we move into next year, we'll begin seeing and building out what that looks like. Part of that's based on the work with Solution Tree. So we have a partnership this year with Solution Tree. That's kind of the big consultant company around PLC at work. They are working with us. They're delivering an assessment coaching academy. So we've got about 65 staff, principals, teacher leaders, teaching and learning team who are participating in this academy. They send out a active consultant in the field, a principal. And our first session was on assessment architecture. We'll dig into instructional agility and how do we really use all of this to invest in student development. But it's really focused on how do we design high-quality assessments, how do we look at that data to make effective decisions regarding students, and how do we track that progress. So we'll be building that knowledge into our communication, into our guidance for those PLCs, and into our processes. The other area I want to focus on regarding professional development is our instructional coaching. And specifically, a newer strategy within that this year is our learning cohorts. So coaches are actively involved, again, use of data, where teachers are identifying goals, looking at their own individual data. Where do I want to grow? Where do I need to improve? Coaches then work with those individuals on whatever the strategies are that they've identified to move students forward. They add that observational data as well. Go into the classroom, this is what I saw, this is, and so they are able to have that reflective conversation then about the changed in practices that they're trying to implement. I like to say that improved instruction does not occur through going to a workshop, attending a seminar. Changed instruction, improved instruction only happens through implementation and reflection. To try it, to reflect on it, and to try it again. That's the process that we have to go through. And so the instructional coaches provide that structured framework to do that. Another framework, as I mentioned, is the learning cohort. So one of the changes that we made within QComp was to introduce this idea of a learning cohort where you have groups of teachers who come together to learn on a shared topic. Different from the PLC or the Collaborative Action Team, which we want geared around student data and growth. This is about a group of teachers wanting to learn something and implement it and to see what improvements those make. So there's a number of cohorts that are built. For new teachers, there's a required cohort for them. Others at a building level or district-wide, there are different learning cohorts that are being built. So the instructional coaches are actively involved in building out what this cohort looks like, what's the instruction that goes along with it, how they're going to get into the classrooms to observe and to lead those reflective conversations. And it's important to note that this is one of the required steps that teachers need to go through in order to receive their full QCOM stipend.
Can I jump in with a quick question? That's all right. This sounds really impressive. My big question is, when do teachers have time to do all this? It sounds like they're in multiple groups and multiple support systems. Is this all happening during the contract day? Are we looking at this looks like it's job embedded, so I'm assuming it's during the contract day.
It's both within the day and outside. So that stipend that they earn, right, I think it's the $13.50 or something like that. A large chunk of that is built off of the work that they do here. So there is an expectation that they would do the work outside of the day as well, but also implement what they're learning into their classroom. So it's that implementation with that reflection with the coach that provides that job embedded aspect as well. So,
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. So last area I just want to highlight, what are the big areas, right, that we're focused on within our more traditional professional development. So as you think about a professional development day or as we hire consultants, there's specific content area. Again, continuing that focus around elementary literacy. We did bring in Haggerty phonemic awareness materials for our staff. That was part of our Welcome Back workshop week. We have cohorts of teachers going through letters training. In fact, Sky Hookstra is going through the letters facilitation training so that we're able to run some of those internally and create a little more flexibility there. We're also continuing to build that responsive classroom institutional expertise around responsive classroom. So we've got 2 cohorts, some staff who have not been trained in it yet, going through the introductory course, and then another 25, 30 staff going through that advanced course. So building those practices institutionally. And then last, there's always going to be specific content and program support, Amigos Unidos, EL. I think about tech integration and some of the things that are happening there, along with phenomena-based science instruction. So.
Caleb, can I just ask a question? Because I do like to always go back to the community and them supporting the tech levy. And so I just want to point out to the community how important this is, because a lot of this data that you're looking at and the reviewing now, we didn't have ready access to it before the tech levy. Is that correct? I mean, this is really the first time you're kind of able to ready access it. Yeah, because I remember we had John Perry, who was here one time, who was saying, he'd bring certain information, but it was never really on demand.
Yep, so with, and I'll let him speak to this more at a later time, but the integration of our various products provides an opportunity that we haven't had before to really, because Schoology is connected to Power School, which is connected to Performance Matters, which is connected to Unified Insights, we're able to pull that data together and really provide that program level analysis or even student level analysis much differently. On our upcoming slides, I'll talk about our MTSS process and the way that teachers are using data. It's reliant on these systems, so teachers are able to go into the baseball card report to really look at their individual students, to pull in data from all sorts of assessments to track what that progress might look like, or to see themes or big areas that students may be impacted by. So
Chair
yes.
Sherman, you got him going now. I mean, he's
I know.
just.
I love it. I love it too, because I know we talk a lot about the devices in hands and the one-to-one, but what I'm hearing from staff is that this data and that kind of investment in our technology infrastructure is like a game changer for our teachers and for our employees.
Thank you for pointing that out, right? That infrastructure is critical to making sure that everything else happens.
Great, thank you.
All right, on to the next and last big bucket area, which is our multi-tier system of supports. So again, as we're thinking about how do we use data, this is one of the most direct ways touching kids that uses data. So our multi-tier system of supports, I'll refer to as MTSS, probably from here on out, because it's a lot. But this is a formal structure for identifying the supports that we can and should be offering our students. Typically, you've seen in a pyramid form, sometimes red, green, and yellow. I like this graphic a lot better. The one on the left is a schoolhouse, right? That feels a lot more appropriate. And what this graphic does for me is it really highlights that the MTS system is a system for all students to access that high levels of learning, including social, emotional, and academic and behavioral considerations as we think about that. And again, this graphic really points out you need effective leadership to make this work. You need fidelity of implementation of the processes of these steps to make it work. And you need to have that high quality instruction and interventions to make all of this work. And so as we think about multi-tier system of supports, we think of it in three tiers. That first tier is what we refer to often as core instruction, but it's the universal supports, the supports that all students have access to in accessing the core content and the core instruction. The second tier is that targeted support. It's support for students with very specific needs that we are able to identify through our data. Typically, that would be 10 to 15% of students within a school or within a grade level or a classroom that need those supports. Tier 2 supports are provided by the classroom teacher as a form of additional instruction that can play out in a couple different ways. I'll talk about the what I need time or win time that we use here in the district. But the key is that classroom teachers are providing that additional instruction, targeting that support for students. Then we have tier 3 supports, which are those intensive supports. So when we think about ADSYS or Read With Me, Title I, some of those specific programs where you're pulling students out of a classroom to receive that intensive work, usually in groups of 3, maybe 4, sometimes 1, whatever is needed. And so the goal is, as kids move up the tier, to also bring them back down, and so they can leave the school building and head back into the workforce, right? I also like the snowman, which is the same kind of idea, right? And as winter is approaching, that takes on extra meaning and significance. But we can also use this graphic to look at how the data is actually playing out. We don't want a snowman with a head that's huge. It will topple over. Same thing if the middle section is too big, it's going to be too heavy for the base and it's going to collapse. We can see the same thing within our data. If our tier 2 is too big, if we have too many students that need intensive interventions, everyone in the system feels stressed. Everyone feels the weight of that, and it crushes upon us. And so our goal, as we look at data, as we identify students, is to make sure that we're providing the necessary interventions along the way at every level, that classroom teachers are engaged in press and letterland, that our interventionists have fidelity of their content as well as time built into their schedule, that kids aren't going to be interrupted.
Yes.
So I don't want to put you on the spot here, but this is some information I think the board would be interested in at some point. So in a perfect world, if we have 15% of
Yeah.
our students at tier 2 and whatever percent at tier 1, how does Stillwater compare our student population to that perfect world?
That head is 5% or less is the goal, and we are well above 5% in reading. I don't know the exact number on the top of my head, but we are in double digits in terms of who needs intensive interventions, and that middle section is also very large. It certainly doesn't follow the 10 to 15% and 5% that would say it's a high-functioning MTSS system.
So then, based upon that information, we have to adjust strategies
Correct.
and resources to meet the needs of our students.
Yep.
Okay.
And so that is, I'll get to it on not this slide, but the next slide, some of the structures and strategies that we're trying to put in place. I talked to a lot about this already. I would just highlight that a tier 2 is critical to make this work, right? Being the classroom teachers providing that additional instruction. So in reading, I said we're over that 5%, we are, and we want to pull students who are at the 15th percentile nationally and below. So we have too many students who are in that lowest band needing that support. Our interventionists, as soon as kids move out of that band, the expectation is that classroom teachers take that on. So classroom teachers are providing additional instruction for kids in the 16th to 40th percentile band. And so we need to have resources allocated, time allocated, calendars allocated to make sure that this can happen appropriately. Otherwise, tier 3 is trying to do everything, and we can't do that. We can't intervene our way out of low scores on MCAs, right, and whatnot. It has to be a system approach. I focus mainly on the academic side. There are the social, emotional, and behavioral sides that we're building out as well. We've identified some additional resources. I hired Danielle McGill to come in to lead the district in some of these efforts. Those are, in some ways, beginning. We have Second Step, we have green rooms, we have check-in, check-out kind of processes, but in terms of the same kind of structured system of MTSS that we have for the academic side of the house, especially in reading, we need to continue growing and building that. Mathematics as well is not at the same level. We've prioritized our interventionists on reading. There are math needs as well. So this last slide then just highlights some of the structure that we're trying to provide to our MTSS system. So, as I mentioned, all classroom teachers are asked to provide, to perform Tier 2 additional instruction interventions. We've also asked all of our classroom teachers to be involved in the data collection and assessment. So as part of Ready, Set, Go, every K-5 teacher conducted any number of assessments. Kindergarten, first grade, there were 4. They did the early reading battery of assessments. And at 2 through 5, they ran the CBM reading, a fluency probe. Yeah.
Just a quick question. It's a little bit more Is Tier 2 typically done by classroom teachers in other districts? So Tier 1 and Tier 2 is typically, okay. So we're not unusual.
We're not unusual in that. It does, and I'll speak to it, it does take some challenge and some troubleshooting in terms of how you do that. But even within a scheduled day, a single teacher could provide a 20-minute, 30-minute period of what I need to a group of kids. Ideally, you've got that designed differently so that if there's 4 of us teaching 3rd grade, we can take a look at the kids and say, okay, you take these 5, I'll take these 5, and so we can group them a little bit more appropriately by what they need. But an individual teacher, it's harder, right? But it can be done. Maybe not with the same kind of frequency that it could be done if you had a team organized around it. But so we've asked all staff, all teachers to be involved because again, Tier 2 really demands that all hands are involved in this work. And so staff are building that win time into their instructional day. Classroom teachers are also asked to progress monitor this year. So every other week, they're running one of the probes on our students. You know, maybe they have 5 kids in their classroom. Each probe is about a minute. Add some transition time. Over a 2-week process, you're spending 5 to 20 minutes, right? I want to give a nice range, but there's time that they're dedicating out of that intervention time to track progress, to see what's going on, so that after every 6 weeks, we can look at that data and say, okay, is this student responding to the additional instruction? If not, what do we need to do differently? How do we intensify that intervention? Do we need to move the student into a higher level, into a Tier 3 perhaps? So it's all about structuring those conversations. And so on this schedule, you'll see that we've also built in swim meetings, data meetings, school-wide intervention times where the interventionist meets with the grade level team to look at that data to say, okay, here's all the kids who are in Tier 2 and Tier 3. Here's the needs that we're seeing. Here's the progress that they're making. Here's the ideas that we can support and areas to focus on with that work. So by building out a schedule and working with our principals to make sure that we can implement this, we're able to structure those conversations in a way that we haven't necessarily been able to do, certainly not last year. The last thing I would mention is this every 6 weeks, that intentionality to come together to look at the data is another critical step to this work. And it requires that district leadership support from teaching and learning. It requires the support of the building principal, requires the instructional coach and that interventionist to really focus in on the data, work with those teachers to see what can I do, what can they do with those 5 kids, 8 kids to make sure that our kids are growing. It's hard work. Teachers are stressed with a lot of this right now, with the assessments, with the win time, with the press, and some of these things aren't new. We've had press in the district for 8 years. We've been doing win time for a while. That doesn't make it any easier. So. But I think everyone looks at the data and says, we need to focus in these areas. We need to continue looking at our data, moving forward with our data so that kids grow and improve.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Is this structure or this schedule new this year, or is this something that we've been or gone through for a full year? This looks very nice and organized. So I'm just curious if we've worked through this whole
I can't
plan
speak,
before.
years past what it's looked like. We did not have this last year.
Okay.
And Caleb, just to clarify, this is year 2 for you, right? Is this your 2nd year or 3rd year?
Yeah, I'm 14 months in.
Yeah, you're 14. I mean, you haven't been here long.
Yeah.
You've
Right.
done an amazing amount of work in a short amount of time.
I will look back to my team. I should have asked them all to be here to,
Yeah.
take the credit because they really have put in a lot of time and effort and energy into this. Sky Hoekstra brought this schedule.
This is amazing.
And let's mark this out and how do we make this happen? So.
Yes, Director Petrie.
Yes, and I would just like to say, excellent job. I mean, I know that when you arrived 14 months ago, that there were a lot of empty chairs in your department. And I'm really impressed that you were able to put together this sort of a structure and systems in a relatively short period, and fill those seats with, I am sure, good people who are going to help you execute this. I want to go back to the MTSS and the fact that we have more than the percentage of ideal students in those Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. Bearing in mind that, you have a pretty new department here, do you know how that measures up against what has historically been the case in this district? Are we seeing the effects of the pandemic, or what are we seeing here?
In terms of how many students were in the lowest national percentiles, I haven't done that analysis over the longitudinal. I can certainly look at that. Looking at our numbers now, for sure, I can't look at, and I think all districts would say the same thing, that the pandemic, we're still dealing with the impact, the learning, the impact of learning that the pandemic has had. But at the same time, we're putting those pieces in place that need to be there. So regardless of what the history looks like, these are the things that we have to be doing. The earlier slide with the Haggerty phonemic awareness and the Letterland for phonics, really focusing on those components at our K2 is something that we haven't had, that we need to focus on, connecting that to this work. So I would venture to say, just knowing kind of where our data is at, that it is we have higher percentages at that lowest percentile than we had, before the pandemic.
I had heard too last year from some intervention teachers that because and I think we were advised this as a board, that we were having a lot of substitute issues, finding substitutes. And so I think a lot of times our intervention teachers were being pulled into classrooms and weren't actually pulling out those students. That's what I was hearing from staff, where they were looking forward to getting to a place where they could actually be doing what they were supposed to be doing as an interventionist. Is that getting better this year? A little bit?
I think, I'm speaking for my wife here, who's a substitute at the high school. She's busy every day, but I don't think most days she's not, so most days she gets a prep. So when she doesn't get a prep, that means that we are really short. And so I think it is better. Let's ask the students, do you have more subs? How do your teachers compare this year to last year with subs?
I've noticed that there's I think last year there was a lot more subs that I hadn't seen before, just kind of coming in and out, but now I feel like there's a solid set teachers who are substitutes at our school that seem to float around to multiple classes. I haven't noticed an issue with any of my teachers.
Yeah, barely any of my teachers have really needed subs, but I'd actually kind of say the opposite more this year. I've seen a lot of people, every sub I've had, I've never recognized them before.
Yeah, maybe it just depends.
It really does depend.
Interesting. Do you see, so you maybe don't recognize or you recognize people, but do you have any do you think you see less subs this year than last year? Are the amount of absence, because we did struggle finding so many substitutes, or is it kind of the same in terms of how many substitutes you might see on a given day in your classes?
Most of my teachers haven't really been missing. They haven't had to miss school too much, so
maybe it's a little better.
Yeah, maybe it's better, but that also could just be teachers I have.
Yeah.
I rarely see a sub. Most of my teachers, the only times they've missed is for for instance, my science teacher, he was gone because he had a conference or something. Yeah. It's just things like that.
Yeah. I haven't had any random sicknesses or anything like that.
It did make a difference last year. I know we were told about that a lot. Yes.
So we've been having our reading levels going down for a long time, even before the pandemic, steadily decreasing. And it seems like we need to do more than our standard, interventions. It seems like to me that there might be other like things that need to be assessed in these classrooms. Like, I guess I work with a vision therapist, and they're saying they see more and more kids with eye convergence problems and dyslexia problems, and there's certain tests they could do that aren't that difficult, but it almost seems like we should have someone like that if we're worrying about reading, and it also affects math if you can't really read that well, that we should be thinking about getting eye therapy type people to come and assess the kids and assess if they have some vision problems that aren't necessarily obvious from your typical eye test. And I say this from, my son had that problem, and he did eye therapy and jumped up 4 reading levels in a week after his eye therapy was done. And our neighbor went to that, and a similar thing happened to her. And we had a 17-year-old neighbor who was having trouble reading, and he went to eye therapy, and then he got better at reading. So there are things going on that it might not be, I don't know why. It could be because kids are using screens more. It could be because, I don't know why it's happening. But if we're not going to assess for other things, I think you're going to kind of, you're not addressing some of the underlying reasons why some of the problems are existing. And it's quite a few percentage-wise. Like when I talked to the vision therapy person, they said approximately 15% of kids are having these convergence problems with their eyes that involve their eye muscles. And so it just seems like we should be thinking about that in some of these situations and thinking about doing assessments like that.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's a lot of reasons why students may have struggles with math and reading. Eye convergence is one of those. Dyslexia is another. And so part of it is looking at our systems and what are the areas that we need to focus on.
Yes.
One final just comment from me on this. You know, when we talk class sizes, and you heard me say, you know, I think we've had some higher class sizes that I've seen. My concern is when we have a significantly number higher of students in Tier 2, and they're in a large class, it just puts that much more pressure on the teacher to try to meet the needs of the students. So again, that is something we'll circle back to when we're looking at planning for the future, but that's certainly a factor when we're looking at our situation here within the district and how we're addressing it.
So I feel like just for me as a board member, I'm starting to kind of see this plan that's kind of coming out when you were talking about these 3 areas of focus. So I guess I'm thinking, I mean, this all looks great, and it's more than we've been able to do in past years, but are you going to eventually be coming to us with budget requests?
Well, that's how it's supposed to work.
Right,
It's
because
supposed to.
because is it going to be more than is currently allocated today in these areas?
Well, you just heard we just got a finance director, so.
Right.
But so those are going to be the values questions that we bring to you as a board. We'll make recommendations, but it's really going to be, you know, you as the representatives of the community, you know, to A, figure out, okay, we can fund this, B, no, we can't, or C, we need more money. And so that's why you need a framework in place.
Right. I mean, this is an excellent framework, so I'm excited for those conversations that are obviously going to be coming.
And to that point, you know, when we asked the community last fall to pass 2 levies, and one was a renewal of our longstanding operating levy, but also we asked the community for a little bit more money. And I think that we all sort of said at the time at this board table that we were hoping to dedicate some of that extra funding to achievement, because we realized that especially with the pandemic, that there were going to be significant needs. And so I look forward to hearing what the plan might be going forward.
Great.
All right.
You know what, I had
yes.
one more question. I'm just sort of curious, and, you know, I don't really know the answer to this, and I imagine that other members of the community might not either, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the convergence between standards and choosing curriculum. You know, when standards change and every 10 years, the standards might change. How do you then go about choosing curriculum? It's not like there's just one choice out there. How do you choose what sort of things are you looking at? Are you looking at what we have right now and how it might mesh with a new curriculum, or what sort of things are you looking at when you're choosing?
That may be another study session topic. I can certainly, yeah, no, I mean, to your point, you do need to dig into the standards to look to see what is the instructional shift that is happening. Not just how the words might be different. Sometimes a benchmark from the previous set of standards looks very similar to the benchmark now, but there's other context around it that changes. So, for instance, when we look at the science, there's a massive instructional shift that's taking place. So we looked at our current FOSS materials that we're using in elementary and said, this is not going to meet what we need it to meet for the next round. So we already know walking in, it's got to be something different. Then it's really digging into those standards to understand what's the content specific that's being asked for, what are the instructional shifts that need to take place, and then looking to see what are the available resources on the market to purchase. And then the next conversation, this is the one that we need to have, is what do you do when they don't align? Right? So Minnesota has added additional standards, has taken standards from a national level and replaced them into different areas. We're seeing that with science, right? You have the next generation science standards. Minnesota took the pieces and put them in different grade levels. So if you purchase a set of resources designed to run NGSS, you know it's not going to track in the same way that the Minnesota standards do, and there's no resources that are designed just for Minnesota, right? And so the publishers will do what they can to show you where that interaction is, but at the end of the day, you need to make a decision based on what's the best interest for our students right now. But it starts with the standards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It was just a concluding slide. I think I've talked a long time, but data is at the heart of all we do.
Just a final thought for me. I just want to let you know I am super excited for Stillwater right now. First time we've been able to sit down and have a real great conversation about academics and moving forward. And thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Funk. Thank you, Caleb, and your team. This is great. I'm super excited.
Excellent.
First of many conversations. It's exciting to see the framework, so.
I hope so.
Great, thank you.
Right.
All right, we're going to move on in our agenda. And we've got policy items, so we're going to bring back Dr. Cherry. And our first one is our first reading for policy 522, sex non-discrimination.
All right, thanks Board Chair Sherman, Board Directors, and Superintendent Funk. I have a few policies to talk about tonight. The first one is a new, proposed new policy for us, Policy 522, Title IX, Sex Non-Discrimination. A little bit of history here. Our school district has had a very broad non-discrimination policy in place for a number of years. However, we have not had a very explicit policy specifically about Title IX and discrimination based on sex. As a school district that receives federal funds, we are required to have a Title IX policy in place, and the Title IX policy must include a process or a reporting process, and then a grievance process and an appeals process. So that's why this policy, the way that it's outlined, is so long. This is required by Title IX, which is of the Educational Amendments of 1972. It also covers discrimination based on sex, which is also part of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. But I will say the length of the policy and the reason why it is framed the way that it is due to that federal law, Title IX. And so you'll see that the purpose of this is really to set the procedures that the school district would follow in cases of reports of sexual harassment. It provides a clear definition of what sexual harassment is, what it means. It has quite a few definitions. We outline our Title IX coordinator and who that is, who's the responsible party for ensuring that these procedures are followed. That Title IX coordinator is our assistant superintendent, or me. One thing to note is sexual harassment is also most times against the law. And in school districts, we need to ensure that we are following our requirements to respond to this, in addition to ensuring that law enforcement is also following the process that they need to follow from a legal aspect. But for us, it's following our policy and then responding accordingly. The type of determination that we make based on the evidence is different for school districts than it is for law enforcement. So what we use is the preponderance of evidence standard, whereas a legal standard would be beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's a bit of a different standard that we use there. Like I said, the policy does outline the grievance process. That is a big part of this, is ensuring that all of the parties involved would be treated equitably and provided sufficient notice, sufficient participation in the process. And we also outline in this timelines for when the process, each stage of the process would be followed and how that would be laid out. Another important point that's outlined in this policy is the response when a report is made and what we do to follow up on that initial response. It is up to the complainant if they would like to move forward with a formal complaint. Once there's a formal complaint, that's where this lengthy process starts. I can tell you from previous experience, I've been a Title IX coordinator for a decade now, over a decade. And I have always resolved complaints that have come to me through an informal process. So if we actually went to that formal process, we would be involving our legal counsel just to make sure that we were really ensuring, again, that we're following all of the legal aspects of this. And so with that, I'm open to any questions that you might have about our policy as it's being proposed and as it's laid out here. This is a first reading and this is a new policy.
I had asked this question of Director Hawker because I was reading this policy. And so I just think it would be interesting for people that might be reading it. But I think what struck me was that it was in the United States, not outside the United States. Can you maybe touch base on why that's written that way? I know it's the law, but I guess that surprised me. I didn't.
So there are some instances where a school group might travel outside of the United States, but we're held to just what occurs within the United States because it is that federal law. So that's just part of the jurisdiction.
That does not preclude the district from enforcing other policies.
Perfect, okay.
So.
And that's kind of what Director Hawker, but I just thought that would be good because I noticed that and I said, well, we do have people that travel outside, so, okay. Great. Any questions? All right, we'll move on to the next policy this evening.
Okay, just a reminder, we will be bringing this back for a second reading, so if you do have questions or comments, please send them my way.
There's no changes, like that's the policy that's been here already, right? Or is it brand new?
This is a brand new.
Oh, okay.
Great, so now we're here for student technology and internet access and acceptable use. Welcome, Mr. Perry.
All right, so we have two policies that are pretty closely aligned. The first one is the employee technology and internet access and acceptable use 428. This is a policy that we have had in place since 2020, thanks to Director Perry for bringing this to us. I believe we have been looked at as a model at times. Other districts have reached out to us to ask us questions about our existing policy. And so with this, we just have some minor updates, and so Director Perry will explain those to us.
Good evening, Board. Recently, House Funding Bill 2353 passed, which modified Minnesota Statute Section 1332 in relation to the use of technology by staff and students. And so I'm just going to cover that really quickly, and then that's going to impact the changes that we're going to see in our staff acceptable use policy and our student acceptable use policy. The revisor statute requires that within 30 days of the start of the school year, the district provides notification to families about the technology service providers that we use, what kind of data we share with them, and information on how parents can inspect the contract or inquire if they have any kinds of questions. It lays out a number of requirements on technology providers in Minnesota that forces them to protect our students' data. They can't sell it. They are legally responsible for the custodianship of data in their possession. We don't have to do anything with that, but it's a really nice part of the law. And then the last piece is that it restricts the monitoring of students by the school district beyond academic purposes. So that's what we're really going to get into here. So when we look at policy 428, the two updates that we're going to see is around staff notification to parents of classroom apps, and then another piece that is not related to the revisor bill, but is really just about housekeeping on how we use email. So I mentioned before that HF 2353 requires us to notify parents within 30 days of school of the apps that we're using around curriculum testing and assessment and what data is being shared with them. But the reality is that teachers may select an additional resource to use in their classroom in January, in February. And so in line with the intent of the law, this policy tells our teachers that before they begin using that new software, they need to notify their students' parents that they intend to use that, and sort of cover those elements of the law through that notification. We are also asking them for any apps that they use in the classroom to begin adding those to the syllabus. So that's just a part of the upfront notification that parents can always go in, especially when you have kids in Schoology. We encourage teachers to keep that syllabus updated in Schoology so parents can go see it. But the policy is requiring active notification when new apps are adopted. The housekeeping piece is around just the use of email. So we have a few statutes in here around email, and what we're asking, mostly so that there's common expectations across the district, is that staff only use the email groups for which they are a part of the building, and that district-wide communications go through our district communications department. And those are our updates for staff. Any questions on that?
Nope.
And roll into students?
Yeah.
All right. The updates to student technology and internet access and acceptable use policy 524. There are three kinds of updates. Some of the updates are just updates to MSBA boilerplate language. Some of the updates are related to HF 2353 specifically. And then some of the updates are related to our one-to-one program. Much of the law around 2353 is now embedded directly in this policy. So if you read 2353 and you read this, these policy updates, you'll see word-for-word language matching, which really comes down to that notification that we talked about earlier. So it was I think it was 29 days into the school year, we sent all of our families a notice about all the apps that we use. We have a page on our website now that we keep updated for all of our testing and assessment and curriculum programs. We indicate what data elements are shared with those companies, and then we try to link some kind of privacy policy that's specific to that so parents can see exactly what contracts are in place there. In addition to that, we've started our one-to-one program, and so we have our school-issued devices. And earlier in the year, I brought you a presentation on one-to-one, and I talked about what the responsibilities were going to be, what the fee schedule is going to look like, and what we were going to share with parents in terms of our expectations of the students and them. That almost word for word is codified in here of what was brought forward earlier. So it's been put into policy format so that it's here. Now, this year, when students came back to school, we had parents sign off on the handbook, and we had all the one-to-one program information separate. So the intent is now to fold that into the policy. So in the future, there won't be a separate acceptance of the one-to-one conditions. That is just a part of our student use of technology policy. The last piece on here on the back goes back to 2353, which is limiting screen time for children in preschool and kindergarten. The nutshell version of that is that the youngest children in the district cannot use technology unless it's being used actively with an instructor. So this doesn't happen in our system, but you can't put little kids on devices and wish them good luck. So we don't do that, but it is now a part of our policy. Any questions on that? I should mention this policy has to be reviewed annually, so you'll see there's a lot of updates every year on it. It is part of the federal Child Internet Protection Act that this policy gets public viewing every year.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, and we are on our last item for this evening, second reading for policy 806, crisis management.
Great. And so just a reminder, the previous two policies, the tech policies, they were first reading, so we'll bring them back next time for a second reading. Okay, so crisis management policy 806. This is our final reading, or I'm sorry, a second reading on this policy. This again is revised and updated to align with our emergency procedures and our standard response protocol. If you recall, what you're seeing here on the screen are the 5 main actions that we might take in an emergency, a crisis situation. And this also is one of those policies that we should be reviewing on an annual basis. And at this time, we haven't had any updates since our first reading, so I'm just here to see if there are any questions or anything you might want to review again.
Are there any questions? And as always, providing them back to the committee, any comments outside, back to the committee so they can discuss it. It's appreciated. Great. All right. Seeing no questions on this, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know how.